Hi everyone, it's Mr.Boll here, and this is our Year 3 Geography lesson. So in this week we're on climate and we're on week 6. And in week 6 we're going to look at where we live. Which climate zone and biome do we live in? So we have been discussing the polar climate zone, the desert zone, and also the monsoon zone last week. And now we're going to look at our zone. These are some of the words that we're going to be using this week. The temperate climate zone, that's a phrase we're going to be using, and we're talking about the biome of deciduous forest. Okay, so new word, deciduous. I'm going to tell you what that means during this lesson. And we're going to talk about the seasons in the year. We'll also talk about the flora and fauna of the temperate climate zone, which means the plants and the animals that live in that climate zone. Let's just have a little reminder. So first of all, if you remember that this first line is pointing to the North Pole, can you just quickly call out what is going to be here is, I'll just remind you of this one, this is the Arctic Circle. Can you do the other lines, okay? Say what they are going to be, okay? I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, well done. These are the lines of latitude, okay? So after the Arctic Circle, the next important one is the Tropic of Cancer. Then we've got the equator, the imaginary line that goes around the middle of the world, Tropic of Capricorn, the Antarctic, and finally the South Pole. And the climate zones, you'll remember doing this, we have the polar zone, which is at the top and also at the bottom of the world. After that, we have the temperate zone, subtropical, so anywhere that's inside this Tropic of Cancer or the Tropic of Capricorn down here. So anywhere between those two areas is subtropical. Then we have the tropical zone, the equatorial zone, tropical again, subtropical again, temperate again down near far south, like places like New Zealand, and then finally the polar climate zone at the bottom of the world where the Antarctic is. Now, where are we? Well, as you know, we're up here at the top of Europe. We're above the subtropical zone, but we're below the polar zone. Our zone is the temperate climate zone. And temperate means it's in between. It's not too hot and it's not too cold. So we'll be talking about the temperate climate zone this week where we live. Here's another way of looking at the world with its climate zones. And as you can see, the green zone is where we are. So here's us in the United Kingdom. Okay, and we're here. This green zone represents quite a big area going right the way across the world. Now, one reason why there's a lot more green in the northern hemisphere than there is in the south is when you get to these as far south, so as you know, the equator is very hot. Above the equator is still very hot until you get to about here, the subtropical zone ends, and here. Now, in the southern hemisphere, there's actually not much land at the equivalent latitude, okay? So the land here down at the bottom of South America, you do get a temperate region there, and you can get some temperate, the same sort of characteristics here in the temperate zone in Tasmania and in New Zealand. But as you can see, there isn't much land here in this latitude in the southern hemisphere. So most of the temperate zone is in the northern hemisphere. And when we're talking about the particular biome that we live in, we have a deciduous forest biome. So what's a deciduous forest? Well, most of the trees in Britain that grow naturally, so don't worry about the ones that have been planted by people, but the ones that would grow naturally are deciduous. And that means that in the autumn, they drop their leaves and they then conserve their energy through the winter, which is much colder, and then they start new buds and grow new leaves next year. So deciduous trees are the type of trees that grow, especially our biome is a particular type of temperate zone called a deciduous forest biome. Now, the other type of trees that you can get are conifers, and they're trees like pine trees, and as you know, we call them evergreens because they don't drop their leaves in the winter. So deciduous trees are the trees that grow in the UK. So this week, our learning objective is to learn all about the temperate climate zone and the deciduous forest biome. So here's a picture of some wonderful scenery, and this is the type of scenery we have right here on our doorstep, where we live. Okay, so next one. Now, another factor that affects our biome, where we live, is the way that the Earth tilts. Now, here's a globe, which is, we're looking at it the way we would normally look at it, where it's just straight in front of us. And there, I'm sure you've noticed, there's the UK up here at the top. Okay, now, it isn't really like that. It's actually tilted. Now, this is the tilt of the Earth. The Earth is tilted at 23.5 degrees. And so, in relation to the Sun, it's actually tilting a little bit towards the Sun, okay, in the summer, and a little bit away from the Sun in the winter. And this is why, as we go around the Sun, it takes us 365 years to get all the way around the Sun. This is why we have summer and winter. And not everywhere in the world has such a definite change between summer and winter. Some areas, especially on the equator, the weather is roughly the same the whole year round. It's always hot, and it's nearly always as wet, as we discussed before. Okay, so in this, when the world is here, here's the UK, when the world is tilted to the Sun in this way, it's our summer, like it is now. So in June, we're tilted towards the Sun, and soon we're going to be having the longest day, when we'll have light until probably about near enough 10 o'clock in the evening, and it gets light in the morning very, very early, about 4:15, 4:30. Okay, but as you know, it's not like that the whole year round. Now, while we are tilted towards the Sun in our summer, in June and July, in the southern hemisphere, as you can see, they're tilted away from the Sun. Okay, so down there, they're having their winter, and they're having cold weather. Especially the further south you go, the more likely you are to have seasons the way we do. So it's winter in the southern hemisphere. Now, and we're going to move the world now. We're going to move it 6 months forward. So we're going to move it to our winter. So here goes the Earth traveling around the Sun. Remember, it takes a year to get all the way round and get back to the same place. So it takes half a year, there we go, to go around like that. And now you can see the southern hemisphere is tilted towards the Sun, and the northern hemisphere is tilted away. So it's much colder where we live in the winter, in December and January. Much darker as well. It gets dark about 4 o'clock in December. And when we go up to Aberdeen for Christmas to see my wife's family, it actually gets dark there even earlier, because it's even nearer to the North Pole. So, you heard probably stories of people in Australia, which is in the southern hemisphere, when it's Christmas Day in December, some of them say they're going to go and have a barbecue on the beach, which is something that you wouldn't want to do if you lived in Britain, obviously. So when the world is around that side, the tilt of the world means that it's winter in the northern hemisphere and summer in the southern hemisphere. Now, the fact that we have these very distinctive seasons affects the flora and fauna, which remember means the plants and the animals that live in Britain. So let's just take a look at some other details now. Here's the world's average temperatures. Okay. Now, some of these maps we've seen before, but we're looking at the UK. If we look at this yellow colour and use the key, we can see that the average air temperature in Britain is about 5 degrees centigrade. And that is a sign of it being a temperate region. As you can see, it's similar down here. And when in the very hot parts of the world, like on the equator, the average air temperature in some places gets up as high as 35 degrees. And you'll remember that these are desert areas in Australia. It's very, very hot. Down at the poles, it's very, very cold, which was what we looked at in week 2. And there you get average temperatures dropping down to these, with the very dark blue colours. Rainfall. Now, rainfall, again, Britain is temperate. So we're not, in terms of temperature, we're not too hot and we're not too cold. In terms of rainfall, we get a middling amount. It's a good amount for crops to grow. So in some ways, we're quite lucky. Our weather is in the middle. We don't get a really, really heavy rain like the monsoon area that we looked at last week. Okay, but equally, we don't have it really, really dry like it is in the Sahara Desert or the Mojave Desert, which we looked at the week before. So our rainfall, using the graph, down here in the south of England, we look at this colour, we see it's a light blue colour, and we're in this region here between these two. So, now, the type of creatures that enjoy living in the deciduous forest biome. So here's a lot of creatures. Now, you might not have seen every single one of these because some of them are quite rare. For example, a pine marten, it does like deciduous forest, but sadly, they've died out mostly in England and Wales. You do occasionally see them in Scotland. I have actually seen one, but it's very unusual to see them. Red squirrels, you might have seen them on the Isle of Wight because they still live on the Isle of Wight. Most of the rest of the country, it tends to be more grey squirrels. You've almost certainly seen grey squirrels. You might have seen a fox, and they're quite cunning, as you know, and they can get into your bins if you're not careful and take some of your food that you might have thrown away. We don't get many red deer. Again, they're more common in Scotland, but we do have fallow deer and we do have roe deer. And sometimes, especially just before night time, you might see them. And some areas around where we live in Borden, you have to be a bit careful not to run into one at night if you're driving through the woods. Badgers, there's lots of badgers in our area. You don't often see them. And I expect you know the reason why. Can you call out why you don't often see badgers? Okay, well done. So there are two reasons. I expect you know they're nocturnal, and they do most of their things that they're going to do at night time. They're also very shy, and they don't really like seeing humans. They get a bit scared. Okay, and so we don't see many of them. But these are the creatures. We don't often see adders either. They're not a dangerous snake, although that looks as if it might be dangerous. They're actually very small. So, these are the type of creatures that enjoy living in the deciduous forest biome. Okay, another one that you don't often see but you might hear is a woodpecker. So what we're going to do is task number one. We're going to choose a creature. So it could be one that you can see here, or it could be one that you choose. But if you're choosing a creature, there's two things you can't choose. You can't choose your pet cat or dog or your rabbit. It can't be a pet. And you can't choose something that isn't a native creature that lives in Britain. Okay. Now, so I'm going to choose the squirrel. So I'm just going to write about the squirrel, and I want you to do the same, how it's adapted to live in a temperate climate zone. Okay. So I've tried to consider how it's adapted to living in the woods and also how it's adapted to the seasons, because the squirrel has to be able to live in our summer, which gets quite warm and dry, but also in our winter, which gets very cold and wet. So how is it adapted to do that? So squirrels are adapted to survive in the temperate climate of Britain. They live in the deciduous forest biome. Their long tail and sharp claws help them climb large trees and leap from branch to branch. They also have exceptionally flexible ankles. These adaptations mean they can climb head first down a tree. You've probably seen squirrels do that, but I don't want you to try it. They can store food ready for when the weather turns colder in late autumn, and food will be in short supply. Their fur keeps them warm in winter, and although they don't hibernate, they do sleep for long periods in the winter to conserve energy. So, in my waggle, I've tried to say why they're adapted to living in the deciduous forest and why they're adapted to living in a country that has seasons where the temperature varies quite a lot between summer and winter. So that's your first task. Can you choose a creature? And remember, you could just choose one that's on my list and do a bit of research. And when you did this for a desert creature, it was really good. So see if you can do a similar thing now and write about that creature. The second task is something that if we were at school normally, we could set up a really brilliant nature table and people could bring in things that they find when they're out walking the dog or just out visiting, they're just going to the shop or whatever they were doing. Now, at the moment, we're not doing that, but you can still do something similar. And I want you to be able to recognize the leaves of the major tree species that grow in our area. Now, these are all deciduous trees, okay? And they all do grow in Britain. However, some of them are more likely to see than others. And so I've circled the ones you're more likely to see. Now, in our area, in the southeast of England, we have lots and lots of beautiful oak trees. Okay, and this is the leaf. And on the next page, I'm going to show you that leaf in a little bit close up, more of a close up, so you can learn to recognize it and you'll always know it in the future. Another one is we're very famous in Hampshire for our beech woods. Okay, so that is a very common tree in this area. Here's a birch tree, so you can see a slightly different shape, a bit more like a triangle. And also very common in the south of England is a sycamore. And I've got that one on the next page as well, a little bit bigger. And I'm going to teach you a little trick for learning to recognize it. Finally, I've included the ash here. They are very common. Unfortunately, we're having a period now, you might have heard people talking about it, where there's a disease that a lot of ash trees are getting, and it's called ash dieback. And so we think we're losing a lot of the ash trees throughout the whole of Britain and Europe that are really beautiful. You can see they've got these sort of very thin, long, thin leaves, a bit like fingers, and a lot of them have got this ash dieback, which is very sad. Okay, so, and here's a hazel. You see these a lot. They don't get as big as some of the big trees like beech and oak. You see these a lot in hedges. So you might even see these in the town if there's hedges along the side of the road. Okay, now, your task is to learn to recognize these leaves, okay? And I know some people aren't going out much at the moment, which is absolutely fine. And then what you're going to do in that case is use your computer and see if you can test yourself to learn these leaves, okay, and recognize them, right? And if you're doing that, you might want to just add a couple more of these, okay, into your list, okay, like the rowan, for example, yeah, and the hawthorn, which is also quite common. But if your family think it's fine, and you maybe take the dog out sometimes, or you go out for a bit of fresh air and exercise every day, which lots of people are doing, then if it's all right with them, take some photos of different trees that you find when you're out walking, and see if you can work out what the leaves are. Then if you want to send me 2 or 3 photos that you've identified what the leaf is, what the tree is, that'll be great. Here's the instructions, or a little bit more detail for how to recognize some of these species. I've just chosen 3. So here, now this leaf is very, very crinkly. You see the edges, they go in and out like this. So I always think it's a bit like crinkle cut chips that you might have for dinner. Okay, and this one is probably the tree that's most associated with Britain, is the oak tree. One of the reasons it's so famous is that when they've grown quite old and their trunks are really thick, in the old days, that's what people used to use they'd cut down the trunk and saw it in half, and then they'd use it to build big houses because it's so solid, it lasts forever, or they'd use it to build ships. So very famous ships like the Mary Rose were all built from oak trees. Okay, so that's an oak leaf. So I'd like you, if you go out and take a picture and you think, oh yeah, that's definitely an oak, and send it to me with a label saying it's an oak. Right, the next one is a beech. So Hampshire's famous for its beech trees. It's a bit smaller, a little bit. It's nearly a heart shape, not quite. But one thing that you will notice on a beech tree is these very straight veins that the leaves have. So if you're walking past a beech tree, and there are loads and loads of them in Hampshire, so if you are taking the dog for a walk, you almost certainly see some beech trees. So that's the beech, quite easy to recognise. The third one you see these in towns as well as out in the countryside, and this one is called a sycamore. The leaf is quite a bit bigger. Okay, so although the photograph's about the same size as the beech, it's actually much bigger. You could fit probably 4 or 5 beech leaves on this one. Now, this is a type of maple tree. And so the way that I'm going to suggest you learn how to recognize these leaves is by just remember that it's like Canadian flag. Okay? Now, the Canadian national symbol is a maple. And so they have made their flag into the shape of a maple leaf. And of course, theirs is red. But this sycamore, you can see how the shape does remind you of the Canadian flag. So use that as a way of remembering that this one is a sycamore. Okay, oak, crinkle cut chips, Beach, very straight veins, and it's nearly a heart shape. Okay, let's see. Just test yourself. I'm going to take the words away. Call out the right ones. Yeah, well done. Right, so that's task 2. Is to, if you can, go out and send me a couple of photos of leaves of trees and you've identified them. That'll be great. Okay, but if you can't, don't worry about it. Just do some tree recognition work at home with your computer. And then task number 1 is to choose an animal that likes living in Britain, in the deciduous forest biome, the one that we have in our country, and write explaining how that animal is adapted to the temperate zone. Here's some animals again. Okay, and you could pause the video on here if you want to get an idea for which animal to choose. Okay, well done everybody. Take care, and I'll see you soon.